give him a big applause.
So, good morning. Great to see you guys over here in hot Amsterdam, which is a bit of a disappointment for me because yesterday I live in Antwerp, in Belgium. It was bloody hot over there, but I told my wife, no problem. I'm driving up north. In general, north is more fresh and cold. That's like, in some places they have like this huge wall of ice, but it's a different story. But then it turned out to be bloody hot over here too. So I think inside of the room it's still okay, no? We'll see. Maybe we get some heated conversations and debates over Scrum today. So my name is, like Michiel said, Gunther Verheyen, so that's always a challenge for people, even Dutch people. Although in Belgium, the Dutch-speaking part and the Netherlands, we share the same language, we still are not always on the same foot, but anyhow. Great to see you all of you guys at Scrum Day Europe. I've just was informed that we crossed the barrier of 200 people. This is the first time, this is the 4th edition of the Scrum Day Europe, so we have more than 200 people, so I'm really happy to see you guys. Amongst you are a number of people wearing this blue shirt, having PST on it. PST stands for Professional Scrum Trainer. That means those are the people that are part of our Scrum Talk trainer community. The only reason they became a trainer is because they're really, truly Scrum experts. So go find them. If you have questions today, go find them, speak to them, talk to them. One of them is over there, Steve. He's wearing a normal rugby shirt. So it's sort of the equivalent of this one. So that's great. So imagine the 4th Scrum Day Europe. Let's think back. March 2012, 3 years ago, I was in Karlsruhe in Germany, where an American guy called Ken Schwaber approached me, little Belgian, to co-organize an event in the Netherlands. How more international can it be, right? So then we had to think about the name. And it was like, yeah, why Scrum Day Netherlands? I said, oh, I'm from Belgium. I'm not going to organize something that's called Scrum Day Netherlands. That's not me. Then we thought about, let's call it Scrum Day Nordic, because it seems that some American people think that as from Amsterdam, this is sort of the northern part of Europe. So they think that this is the start of Nordic. And then we went for the very international Scrum Day Europe. It's working out fine. It's 4th edition. Every year we have a growing number of people. Lots of interactions. You've just seen the program. Find your way. It's all based on interactions. We try to get a lot of breaks so you can really connect with people. And try to connect with those people, maybe especially if you have like really complicated, difficult questions. Yeah, put them to the test. Get them to answer them. A good trainer will never give you an answer. They will just give you a question back. That's good. So I'm here to talk about Scaled Professional Scrum. It's something that we've been working on at Scrum Talk, and I hope you will like it. We'll see. Cool. So, but let me first try to get to know you a little bit better. So, who's been engaged in any type of effort to try to scale Scrum? Just raise your hand if... Cool. So, if you've been engaged in your organization, what do they call scale? I know there's a Rorschach thing over there. It's like, I'm going to try and be a little bit of your psychologist. I'll give you a name, a term, scale, and we'll see what everybody sees in it, because that's sort of what's happening with scaling. So raise your hand if this is your definition of your organization's definition of scaling. You've got multiple teams, and they all work on a single product. Definition of scaling? Okay. Or does your organization say, oh, we've got multiple teams, they all work on their own product, but you know, it's big, it's huge, so that's our definition of scale. Yeah, a couple of fingers. No, we've got multiple teams and they're working on a suite or a number of products that need to be integrated and are related to each other or connected or share things. Okay, cool. You've got one team and they have to work on 20 products at the same time and they all have to make progress and things like that at scale. Anybody? Okay, cool. Oh no, our full IT organization needs to go to Scrum. We need to do Scrum all over the place. Everybody, IT, all delivery has to do Scrum. That's scale. Right? No, our full organization, not only IT, but the complete organization, complete enterprise has to go to Scrum or something that looks like Agile. That's scale. So that makes it difficult to think about and offer something to help you scale. If we get all of these definitions of scale and we end up in the Rorschach thing, there's something, everybody sees something in the idea of scaling. So let us try to bring our perspective a little bit. So let's talk about scaled Scrum first. And let's start with Scrum. But first, let's see what are areas in which we see people wanting to work. And last year and the year before, standing on this stage, we talked about sort of the right-hand side of this thing. I don't know whether someone, who's been here every edition, by the way, quickly? A couple of people, cool, thank you. Champions of Scrum Day Europe, 4 times in a row, that's great. So we've been talking about things like agility path and agile transformations using Scrum to manage that. That's sort of the right-hand side last year, evidence-based management, empirical management and stuff. But in our opinion, scaled Scrum is something that happens over there. It's about product development. So you do product development with Scrum, you use the Scrum Framework to develop your products and sustain them, and you want to scale over there. So this talk and scaled Scrum, in our opinion, is not about agile transformations, it's not about those things, it's about scaling your product development done through Scrum. So I hope that helps a little bit. One of the previous questions, like you have one team working on lots of products at the same time, that's just a bad idea. That's not scaled Scrum, that's just a bad idea. Little tip, 1 sprint, 1 product. Focus, try to focus, keep focus, avoid multitasking and context switching and so on. So that's good. You might have 20 teams, each working on their own product. That's a lot of Scrum, not necessarily scaled Scrum. That's just a lot of Scrum, but they all do sort of singular Scrum at the team level. So let's talk about scaled Scrum more. And this is our definition of scaled Scrum. Multiple teams working on a clear product at the same time, in general in more sprints, but you know what, sometimes you just go for 1 sprint with multiple teams, you never know what happens. Or multiple teams working on multiple products at the same time. So it's not about agile transformations, and in scaling your product development to Scrum, this is what we call scaled Scrum. Scaling Scrum for your product development, meaning multiple teams working on 1 product, multiple teams working on several integrated or related products. So that, for us, that gives a little bit of focus. It's about transparency, right? Now, if you want to do Scrum, I think it's good to have some basics in place. And what Scrum's DNA is, this is what Scrum thrives on. These are the genes. This is core to Scrum. This is part of every cell, every living element in Scrum. Self-organization, empiricism. People self-organize. The people actually doing the work know best how to do that work. They should be responsible, accountable for the results, for the quality, and they should be given the freedom to organize their own work. That's self-organization. Empiricism, you know the 3 pillars of empiricism: inspection, adaptation, based upon transparency. It's about regularly looking at reality. That also means accepting reality. It's not so easy, it seems, but accepting reality so you can take a good decision upon the perceived reality. And take decisions like that regularly, frequently, so you can inspect and adapt regularly, adapt to reality all the time. So your plan is always kept in line with reality. These are this is the DNA of Scrum. Self-organization, empiricism. The framework, the Scrum Guide, all of these things, they are all based on this thinking. I think that's very important to keep in mind when you talk about Scrum, and certainly scaled Scrum. This is, let's say, singular Scrum, call it simple Scrum, or just call it simply Scrum. You've got a product backlog, you've got a Scrum team pulling work from that product backlog with the goal of producing a releasable increment by the end of every sprint. And a sprint takes no more than 30 days, and in general, shorter. That's the idea of Scrum. This is sort of the picture, the image you should have from Scrum standing outside of Scrum. So what do you see? You see product backlog, work being pulled into a Scrum system, and you see releasable increments coming out of that system every 30 days or less. That's what Scrum should be about, based upon that DNA we just talked about. Now, there's some room for improvement in general. It's what we call professional Scrum. It's what we promote as Scrum the Talk, together with a number of partners like ProVenus, who's co-organizing the event. Professional Scrum, that means you start by doing what we call mechanical Scrum. Some people would call it amateur Scrum. Last week somebody said, yeah, I call it zombie Scrum. So you do a Scrum in a zombie type of way, you just follow the rules, you do the practices, you have the meetings, and that's about it. You have no idea about Scrum's DNA. You have no idea about the values and principles upon which Scrum is based. One of the principles is maybe that DNA, that empiricism, the values and principles expressed in the Agile Manifesto, the Scrum values, the respect for people that we think you should have in doing Scrum. So if you start with mechanical Scrum, just blindly following the meetings, doing the meetings every day, standing up, it's already a little bit of a smell, and asking the 3 questions blindly without thinking, that's sort of mechanical Scrum. If you do that based on the values and the principles, you get to understand the why of Scrum, the purpose of Scrum, the rules, and probably most overlooked in Scrum implementation is room for technical excellence. We do hope that Scrum development teams are professionals in development, so that they should be building quality. In order to build quality, they need access to things. You should facilitate them with tools, infrastructure, architectures, whatever, so that they can actually build excellent products. And you should expect that from them. They should be Scrum professionals. So room for technical excellence. But this is what we call professional Scrum. It's mechanical Scrum done against the values and the principles of Scrum, all of the fundamentals underlying the Scrum framework, and with much room for technical excellence. Scrum is a way to organize work, but Scrum is a way to organize product development work. So not offering room for technical excellence would be strange in a product development framework. But this is for us very important. So you have Scrum, you've got the rules, you've got the outside picture of Scrum, product backlog team, releasable increments, you know Scrum's DNA, and we know about professional Scrum. I think core elements to talk about scaled Scrum. But let's first talk about technical excellence a little bit. When was the last time, who was recently in touch with a real code base? Who really laid eyes on a code base? Who's been working in code base? Somebody in the room? Cool. There's some people that actually survived looking at a code base. Because in general, what we see with code bases, it's sort of an expression of a lack of technical excellence. Because, you know, you've got code bases, it looks like a spaghetti type of system, it's got things all over the place. Code bases are sort of all over the place. Also physically, part of the code base over there, part of the code base over there. Yeah, they don't integrate well. It's got business logic in every possible component that you might find in the code base. It's just a bad thing. It's not well maintained. And in general, it has a sort of effect on people. It's like the Medusa effect. You look at it and you sort of turn to stone. You're not able to move anymore. You freeze. You want to run away as quickly as possible, not look at it again. Oh, no, don't ask me to work in that. I'll just, that's not possible. That's sort of a expression that maybe you've not been paying attention to technical excellence a lot. If you then start scaling, you will probably only scale technical depth instead of good quality. So something to keep in mind when you talk about scaled Scrum. Now, linking that code base to what Scrum does. So a Scrum team, development team, pulls work from a product backlog, and in order to produce a releasable increment, something that's of high quality can be put in production. So that's releasable increment. That's why we have a definition of done to describe what releasable means. So give people an idea of, hey, this is all the work that needs to be done in order to put something into production. It's still a product owner decision, but you know what? They have to pass by that ugly thing that's called a code base. They have to work in it. Now, if you have one Scrum team working on the code base, that might be pretty manageable. It's under control. It's only one team. They've got a sort of picture of where they work in the code base. It's sort of window. It's got some boundaries. It may have some dependencies, but not too much. So it should be feasible, giving the right attention to technical excellence, to actually produce a releasable increment by the end of every sprint of no more than 30 days. Yeah. Now, if you have 3 teams working on that, you still have that one team, have a clear picture of here's where we are working, this is what we need to do in order to produce something that's releasable. But if you get those second team and that third team coming, and they're all working in the same code base, the other ones go blind on all things that's happening, and it's becoming increasingly difficult with 3 teams to produce a releasable increment by the end of every sprint. Certainly if you have a poorly maintained technical system, lack of technical excellence. Now imagine what happens if you have 9 Scrum teams doing that. We already know those 3 teams and they've got lots of things. Now if those 9 teams all start working on the same code base, the same system, with all of the bad practices that people have been using, it's just become a mess. What do you think the chances are that they are able to produce a releasable increment by the end of the sprint, knowing that the increment is at the level of the product, not at the level of a team? meaning increments should be integrated, otherwise they can't be put into production, right? Every team demonstrating, reviewing their own piece of software in their own separate branch, that's not working. That's not something you can put into production. That's not releasable. So this is pretty messy. And why is it so messy? The big killer of scaled development, it's full of dependencies. This system is full of dependencies. You've got dependencies in the product backlog, requirements depending on each other. You've got dependencies within teams, on skills, on specialization, availability of people, people falling sick, and so on. You've got dependencies across teams, teams depending on each other, teams working on product backlog items that are depending on each other, and then your code base is full of dependencies. You've got dependencies on availability of infrastructure, architecture. There are no standards. We use different naming conventions, all these funny things like that. So this is a system is full of dependencies. Dependency is sort of the hidden killer of scaled development, and often ignored. No, it should be about process. It should be about adhering to process. No, it's about how to deal with dependencies, because this system is full of dependencies. And you've got, we named them, it's about dependencies related to people, skills, availability of people, communication, collaboration skills, people working together. It's about more technical dependencies, infrastructure, and so on. And you find them in teams, you find them across teams, and most killing are the dependencies from the external world, like you've got this system of 9 Scrum teams or less more working together, and they're dependent maybe on the finance department for budgeting or external compliances that they have to live up to and that are maybe unknown so far. They have to integrate an external component, work with external companies, whatever. Lots of things. So the dependencies, the real killers of scale development, how to deal with dependencies. In this, we think you can deal with dependencies in 2 ways. In a very proactive way, try to identify dependencies before you start working on them, like via product backlog refinement, working on product backlog 1-2 sprints ahead in time, thinking, capturing dependent product backlog items, reordering product backlog for it by the product owner under the influence probably of the development teams, pointing out dependencies. So that's one example of a proactive way to work on dependencies. But you should try to work on dependencies proactively in all of those dimensions: people, availabilities, product backlog, technical infrastructure, and so on. But there will always be some dependencies that will sneak through, no matter how much time you spend on trying to actively work around them, try to get to know them as much as possible before you start actually doing the work. There will always be some dependencies that sneak through, that you haven't captured. So be quick to catch them, even before they go live. So that's why we advise great technical practice like frequent, maybe continuous integration, maybe even continuous development, so that they have a continuously integrated code base all the time. It's all part of reducing reducing the technical debt. The price you will have to pay afterwards for bad design decisions. Yeah? So proactive and sort of reactive, and we put a little term on it, it's called reification, meaning make it clear, make it tangible, make sort of the uncaptured, the sneaked through dependencies tangible, make them create something actionable. I always use the example of a continuous integration system. You might be thinking that there's no dependencies or nothing sneak through. Look at the log files of your continuous integration systems. That's reification, making it tangible, something you can take action upon. Do it quickly, do it via acceptance testing, do it via acceptance test-driven development, just test-driven development. Do it as soon as possible so that all the dependencies that you haven't captured sort of before you do the work, sneak through, catch them as soon as possible so you can quickly resolve them. So 2 ways of dealing with dependencies, all basic elements of scaled Scrum, and maybe even scaled professional Scrum. You can try to scale amateur Scrum or mechanical Scrum, but you'll probably have lots of problems. Might be worthwhile investing in making your teams more professional first, but you never know. So this is your ability to scale. It will depend on working with those dependencies. It will depend on continuously, frequently, at least integrating your work across all those dimensions. So with the goal of creating and identifying dependencies in the increment, identifying how reified is our increment, how transparent is it, how releasable is it, so we can put it into production. That's sort of, I think, our basics for scaled Scrum. Now we've been thinking about, hey, it should be more than just telling people about those basics, because people have been doing Scrum for 10, 15, 20 years. All of the Netherlands are doing Scrum since early 2011. So sort of the heart of Scrum in Europe, it seems. So many Scrum implementations. It's sort of scary, because I think a lot of people go to Scrum classes and do Scrum just because people tell them to do it. It's not it's not about professionalizing, but anyhow. But we've been thinking about a solution. It's called a framework. It's called the Scaled Professional Scrum Framework. So that, again, that awareness of the Scrum DNA, awareness of what is professional Scrum, so you can start scaling the benefits of Scrum and not sort of all of the dysfunctions that you're hiding by not really doing Scrum properly. Sort of a big difference. And at the heart of the Scaled Professional Scrum Framework, there's something we call the Nexus. And the Nexus is a sort of common word, and the meaning we see in it, it's something that connects people, groups, systems, whatever. It's about laying connections between people, building relationships. Because in Osdorf's dependencies story, it's often overlooked that great software development is built through great communication and collaboration. It's about people working together, interacting with each other, conversing with each other. So let's think about in a scaled context. So you've got multiple teams building one product, multiple teams building multiple products. Let's think about how can we build good connections between those people without adding hierarchies and layers and vertical stuff on top of them. And that's what we call a nexus. So remember Scrum for multiple Scrum teams? It should have sort of the same outside look like one Scrum team, meaning you've got a product backlog going into the system. Let's call that a Scrum system. You've got product backlog going into the system pulls work from the product backlog, and the system, as Scrum, should produce a reasonable increment by the end of every sprint. And an increment is the overall work, it's not at the level of a team. Very important. So we've built a Nexus for that. It's a framework, it's sometimes called the Nexus Framework, Scaled Professional Scrum Framework. It's got all of the knowledge and experience, primarily of Ken Schwaber, and all of the projects he's done together with Jeff Sutherland over the years. We've been working with those bright blue people, PSTs, are experts from all over the world. We've been involving people actually working in organizations, not just doing consulting, and we've built the Scaled Professional Scrum Framework. In a way, this is not new. This just builds on proven practices. We've just combined them into a cohesive framework. Like a long time ago, 20 years ago, what Ken and Jeff exactly did with Scrum. And later it was described in the Scrum Guide. They just brought together proven practices, minimized them, so only the minimal level of prescription, it's called Scrum. This is called the Nexus. Meaning you've got a Scrum system, you've got a product backlog that provides them with work from which they pull in work into the system, and by the end they produce an integrated increment. So this is the Nexus. But what is very important at the heart of the Nexus, the core of the Nexus, it's about getting together 3 to 9 Scrum teams, maybe 3, maybe 6, maybe 9 Scrum teams. We think that what we've seen in experience is that more than 9 Scrum teams working together on one product, that's extremely difficult. Dependencies become so huge that even with good communication paths, you can no longer manage them. So that's sort of the upper limit. So in a team, you see 3 to 9 people in one team because of communication. Otherwise, communication and dependencies become overwhelming. If you have 3 to 9 Scrum teams working together, more than 9 teams, that becomes overwhelming again to manage. You lose control, you lose manageability. So maybe it's something to think about. On the other hand, if you have 9 Scrum teams working together and they're like professional Scrum teams, building technical excellence, understanding Scrum's DNA, that's 81 developers that are really high, top-notch professional people understanding Scrum, understanding the value of and the importance of inspection adaptation, technical excellence, building great quality products. My God, that's a lot of work you get out of 9 Scrum teams. So this is the Nexus. At the heart of it are 3 to 9 Scrum teams, and at the heart of it is integrated work. It's about 3 to 9 Scrum teams, a framework, a way of dealing with Scrum in order to enable those teams to keep their work integrated at all times. So we've got integrated work over there. It's the heart of it. It's the core of the Nexus. And that's why we have a Nexus Daily Scrum. Nexus Daily Scrum is a sort of elaborated version of the Scrum of Scrums. It's maybe a bit more a formal version. It's no longer limited to development people only. It should be all the right people from all the teams working together. And the main source of inspection of a Nexus Daily Scrum should be the state of integration of the work. And that state of integration of the work should drive the daily scrums of individual teams so that they can, hopefully, as part of reification, first handle the lack of integration. Or otherwise, what I sometimes advise people, so your code doesn't integrate, cool, keep adding features. Maybe someday it will magically integrate again. I don't think so. Integrate your work first. How are you ever going to produce reasonable increment otherwise? Unless you're hoping that, oh yeah, you know what, we can do 5 or 6, whatever sprints with 3 to 9 teams, let's say 9 teams, and then magically organize one sort of release or whatever sprint and magically integrate all of that work that wasn't integrated for that 5 or 6 sprints before. It won't happen. It's totally unpredictable. And you create an unmanageable system. That's why Scrum has this focus on the core purpose of Scrum, and also Scaled Scrum, is producing a releasable increment by the end of every sprint, because that will provide you with agility, responsiveness, ways to change, adapt to the market, look for new opportunities. If you don't have that, you're just creating delays for yourself and waste. So at the core, integrated work, main source of inspection for the Nexus Daily Scrum, so it should drive the daily plan of all the individual teams. So it's about creating communication. But it's still Scrum. We've got the normal Scrum meetings. It just has now a sort of Nexus component attached to it. Something in which you bring together 3 to 9 Scrum teams and work on it. And you might see with the product backlog, there's a little arrow over there. It indicates the importance of product backlog refinement. Try to do development through Scrum. 9 teams working from one product backlog, because that's essential in Scrum. You want full transparency over all the work that needs to be done for your product. That's why you have a product and one product backlog. So, and they work on one product backlog. They go into an elaborated version of sprint planning, and the product backlog has not been refined. Imagine the chaos. So do refinement. It's more important at scale than it is at sort of singular Scrum. At sort of 1, maybe 2 Scrum teams, you might get away with not refining your product backlog. If you have 9 teams working together, it won't happen. So that's why it's more important. So there's a number of tweaks. It's still Scrum, but there's more importance to product backlog refinement. Integrated work is at the core of the Nexus. By the way, integrated work should be at the core of every single Scrum team too. So if you do just product development, one product, one Scrum team, they should have integrated work probably all day long, every day, continuous integration, not just by the end of the sprint. That's taking a risk that if it doesn't integrate by the end of the sprint, you will still have some problems. Fascinating to talk at the sprint retrospective, but you never know. So this is just Scrum. One thing we added to, if integrated work is at the heart of the Nexus, if the goal of a Nexus is with 3 to 9 Scrum teams, keeping your work integrated almost at all times, and at least daily inspect the state of integration, there's so much focus on integration, very important. Maybe it's too much for those 3 to 9 Scrum teams to do sort of at an individual level. So we created an additional Scrum team. It's called the Nexus Integration Team. The Nexus Integration Team, the goal of the Nexus Integration Team is not to do the integration work. It's to look over the integration. It's being accountable for integration without doing it themselves, meaning they become a sort of servant leader team for the other teams with regards to integration, providing them with tools, managing maybe infrastructure, developing shared platforms, whatever, but they don't actually do the integration. Doing the integration is still for the individual Scrum teams. It's Scrum's DNA. The people responsible for the results of the work should also plan and organize and do their own work. But if you work with 3 to 9 teams together, it might well happen, it might well be that you have some servant leadership people helping you integration. So that as an individual Scrum team, you can focus as much as possible on adding features and not losing time doing manual sorts of integration again with 9 teams where maybe things could be automated. So we've got the Nexus integration team. Now integration might even be applied to other aspects. It might even apply to the human aspect of doing Scrum. People not connecting well. Maybe there might be a social component. Nexus integration team is a Scrum team. They've got the 3 roles. They've got a Scrum Master, product owner, development team. They don't do sort of wildly floating work. If they do work, they do it from the product backlog. So fascinating to talk to the product owner and get a number of integration development requirements on the product backlog so that they can provide those to the other teams. But the goal in the end is producing releasable increments, integrating your work regularly, preferably at least every day, looking at the state of integration so you can improve your integration, so you improve your chances of producing releasable increment by the end of every sprint. So this looks like Scrum, doesn't it? So this is just to do Scrum, not just with a single team, but with 3 to 9 teams. It's the same meetings, it's based on the same principles, it's based on bottom-up intelligence, bottom-up knowledge creation, and it's about having 3 to 9 Scrum teams as a sort of network. That's why we call the Nexus an exoskeleton. It's a sort of skeleton we put on those 3 to 9 Scrum teams, offering communication pathways, augmenting Scrum, but still not overruling self-organization, not overruling the knowledge those people have by introducing phases and additional roles and so on. And all that needs to be done for the product, possibly even your portfolio or your program of products, it's all in one product backlog. So you've got full insights into dependencies, you can manage them, you can try to work around them, and you've got insights into progress of your development. So have one product backlog, one shared product backlog. So as a quick run through to what we call the Nexus. So this is the heart of Scaled Professional Scrum, the Nexus. Doing Scrum with 3 to 9 Scrum teams. Here's a little question for you. Now, I'm going to give you 3 minutes and do a little team exercise. So there's a lot of people. Just for 3 minutes, talk to people next to you about, hey, this idea of a Nexus, this idea of Scaled Scrum, Scaled Professional Scrum, how does it resonate with you? Do you recognize it? Do you see value in it? Yeah? Will you do that for me? Just talk to each other for 3 minutes, quickly form a team, and talk about all the information that you now quickly in this past half hour sort of got from me. Thank you. You just saved my voice. Strange. We never talked about raising our hand means we stop talking, but still we do that. That's funny, no? Sort of hidden agile, subconscious, whatever thing. Cool. So I hope you had some great conversations. Continue conversations for the rest of the day. It'll all be about scaled Scrum, lots of interactivity, great workshops you can attend, different perspectives on how to scale. I hope they solve all your questions. I'm pretty sure they won't, but at least they will give you some ideas to take back home tomorrow. Cool. So, cool. So some things we talked about. The Nexus, it's about augmenting Scrum. It's still Scrum, but it's a way of doing Scrum with 3 to 9 Scrum teams. It avoids adding a lot of complexity. It's sort of, as much as possible, keeping things simple. And it's about creating relationships between people, between teams, dealing with dependencies in a proactive way via reification regularly. So that's very important. It's got some additional sort of meetings. It's not really new meetings, it's just a way to do meetings at the level of the Nexus. It's got a new role, we talked about it, very confusing for people, because we all think that if the terms integration in there, oh yeah, that must be those people, do it. No, you can be accountable for something without actually doing it. It's like, as a Scrum Master, being accountable for everybody adopting and adhering to Scrum without being a command and control manager telling them what they should do. There are different ways in being accountable. That's really good. Yeah. So this is about the Nexus, it's about Scrum's DNA, it's about using professional Scrum to grow, to gradually scale, try to scale iteratively, incrementally. That's very important. So let me close down the session, a couple of minutes to go with a couple of things. It's about managing a scaled Scrum effort. This is not about traditional management, it's about the act of managing a scaled Scrum development via the Nexus. There's some questions you might want to know. Hey, what's the additional overhead of having to integrate with 9 teams? Maybe that overhead is no longer justifiable in the light of the additional cost. Maybe you're not creating more value for your use with 9 teams than you might be doing with 3 teams. Something to think about. Fascinating questions. We've added in the Scaled Professional Scrum work next to the Nexus, so the Nexus is sort of the beating heart of Scaled Professional Scrum. We've complemented that with sort of 40-like practices. There are good practices, meaning you can select them, but you will always have to apply the right ones depending on your context. Because it's Scrum, right? It gives you a minimal framework to build upon, but we don't know every single of your organization, every single challenge you might have, every single aspect of your unique situation. That's why it's a framework. It's something you can build upon. There are no fixed toolboxes possible that will solve every possible for you. We can offer you a framework. We can offer you a number of optional practices that you might want to use, might want to apply, depending on your context and your situation. That's very important. That's respecting Scrum's principles and foundations, which we think is important. Scaled Scrum should still be Scrum, thriving on the DNA of Scrum, all of the principles, the underlying things of Scrum. So that's really important. A couple of fascinating practices from that. Descaling. If you're working with a number of teams together and you face day in, day out, huge problems in integrating your work, reduce the number of teams until you can produce integrated work again. That's the essential basis of the empiricism of Scrum. By the end of the sprint, being able to inspect an increment with the goal of putting that increment potentially into production. If you're not able to do that, reduce the number of teams until you are able to do that. And then grow again by adding practices, adding teams, adding people. That might be good because we've got this sort of hidden assumption that if we keep adding teams, we keep increasing productivity. It's not that simple. It's not, there's no linear relationship between adding people and teams and productivity. At some point, there's a tipping point where you add teams and you just add additional communication overhead, and the additional capabilities you're creating, they all go up into additional communication, not additional productivity or additional creativity. So think about it. So descale, and even if descaling is not enough, scrumble. Stop everything, stop the line, stop the machine, stop the factory, the whatever, and work on your system again until it's really something you can build upon again. Stop doing Scrum. Just solve your situation, clean up your spaghetti mess until you're able to build something useful again. So scrumble, because sometimes adding people just not even limits your productivity. It might bring your productivity below 0. You add so many dependencies, so many complexities that nobody gets anything done anymore. Or your system is in such a bad technical state that you don't want to go there. And if you manage your scaled effort, your effort to scale Scrum or scale any other Agile process, always keep thinking about this first principle of the Agile Manifesto. It's about delivering valuable software to your customers. So it's not about producing more software, it's not about producing more scope, it's producing valuable software. Software that is appreciated. That's also the purpose of Scrum in producing releasable increments, so you can actually close the feedback loop with your users, your consumers, your customers. And internal users are also users, by the way. If you build systems for internal use, those people should be respected as users of your software too. They might see value, or they hopefully see value in your software. So that was my little talk about Scaled Professional Scrum. I hope you liked it. Let it sink in. Burden those people with your questions, that's fine, or the other people. Get as much as possible out of this Scrum Day, and I'll see you by the end of the day for a little closing. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Gunther.